According to Israeli media, 2 days after its decision on the West Bank, Airbnb is now evaluating whether to drop its listings in the disputed territory of Western Sahara as well, saying, "In the statement we issued on Monday, we noted that we have developed a framework for evaluating how we should treat listings in occupied territories around the world. Western Sahara is one example of a place where we will use this framework." And to break this all down, I'm now joined by a former director of Peace Now, Yariv Oppenheimer, and executive director of the Lawfare project, Brooke Goldstein. Thanks for coming on the show, guys. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Let's start with you, Yariv. Let's connect this also to what they just said about Western Sahara. If Airbnb does not stop listing properties in every disputed territory, you could say that it's true that it is being discriminatory against Israel. It's just one place.
First of all, the West Bank, it's not so dispute territories. If it's dispute territories, so how come Israel established settlements in these dispute territories?
That's not what I asked.
Yeah, but I understand. I don't know the policy of Airbnb, and maybe they got some different policies for different places, and maybe they are going to change their policy.
But they started with Israel. I'm sorry to make it hard for you.
It's fine, but I don't think it's relevant to the decision itself. And by the way, they didn't start with Israel because the West Bank is not Israel. Israel never annexed the West Bank, and all the people that
That's
are saying.
What the ministers are saying,
but there is the fact, eventually the law, the Israeli law, is not being enforced in the West Bank, and it's not part of Israel. Israel never officially annexed the West Bank to itself. So when the government is saying that this is against Israel, so maybe the government itself is against Israel because the government never annexed the West Bank.
Brooke, weigh in here.
So first of all, it's very interesting that Airbnb has come out with the statement about Western Sahara. But if they were going to equally apply their policy to Western Sahara, what they would do is they would say, hey, we're going to delist the homes of white people in Western Sahara, but we'll keep black people there, because that's exactly what they're doing here. They're not delisting homes in the West Bank. They're delisting homes owned by Jews.
But they're saying these Jews don't allow the Palestinians.
It's not just Israelis. We have to be accurate.
What they've said is Israeli settlements. They haven't said we're going to well, who do they consider? It's not a semantic debate.
Conflict. It's not about.
But let me tell you something, okay? Let's say I have a problem with the one-child policy of China, or I got a problem with child labor in Sudan. I don't turn around to the local Sudanese person or a Chinese person and penalize them because of that in a commercial context. That is illegal. Airbnb, all right, is an American company. We could sit here and debate about Israeli politics, and we can use politics in the peace treaty, but what we're doing is we're justifying racial, religious discrimination. They're using the Israeli...
Do you see it as surrendering to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement?
I don't know what their motives are. I'm not a psychologist, but when you look at how they applied it, they are applying it only to Israeli settlements. They're not, which are Jewish homes, but they're not applying it in Jerusalem.
I want to say they're making a distinction, notice, between Israel. They're not boycotting all of Israel. They're saying they have a problem with what's going on beyond the Green Line.
Okay, but to Yariv's point, okay, in 1990, Jordan occupied the West Bank. But in 1994, there was an agreement. And there was also an agreement with the PA where Jews live in Area C. Those were the settlements are. So they're saying that they don't recognize
agreement. But if there is something racist about this story, it's the settlements themselves. Because the settlements are saying, if you are Israeli, you got full rights. And if you are Palestinian, you have less rights and you are living under occupation. And we are not talking here about politics. We are talking about values. And yes, people around the world and inside Israel thinks that morally the settlements are wrong and they should not be there. And it's not specifically about the people there. It's about the idea of settlements.
This is what they want to happen. Your propaganda. They want us to sit and debate about settlements when the fact of the matter is you have an international corporation that's engaged in illegal, racist discrimination.
They are
picking. Okay, first of all, I'll tell you what's racist. If you say that a Jewish home is an obstacle to peace,
it's an Israeli
if you say that a Jewish home is an obstacle. an Israeli Jewish home. You're not saying that Arab homes in Judea and Samaria
I'm talking about a conflict between two nations. And it's not only a conflict, it's a situation of occupation. And yes,
this is all irrelevant
because of the settlements are being built in order to stop us from having peace.
I mean, they clarify Airbnb that it is only going to apply to settlements in the West Bank, not homes, for example, in East Jerusalem.
Correct, because they don't want to penalize Muslims.
Not homes in the Golan Heights as well. So is that inconsistent?
No, I think it's very clear. They are saying that there is occupation in the West Bank, and therefore in the West Bank, when you are talking about the people that are occupying, in East Jerusalem it's a bit more complicated because the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, they want to allow them to have guests because they are not occupying the Israelis, vice versa. And you know what? If there will be a lot of pressure from Palestinian organization, maybe there will be also a change in this decision because there are similarity between the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
But it's not race. But it's not. They're saying that Israeli settlements are illegal. Therefore, we will not allow. Now,
but the international community thinks they're illegal.
Okay. Well, the international community, their legal opinion is worth bupkis. You have a United Nations Commission on the Status of Women headed by Saudi Arabia. I'm not taking anything the UN, the international community says with any type of legal patina.
You know what?
Okay?
Guys,
you're missing the point. You are falling into the trap. We're having a debate about Israel-Palestine, and we could sit here for hours and hours and talk about settlements. That's not the point. The point is you have a U.S. corporation that is engaged in illegal discrimination right now.
The outcome of this argument will be that companies, in the first place, will never step into Israel because immediately that they will invest and they will do something here, these people will force them to go to the West Bank. Otherwise, they are going to be sued. Right. So if you like to boycott the whole idea of Israel, continue with this argument.
Brooke, because there are 25 U.S. states that have laws that require sanctioning of American companies that boycott Israel. Does this fall into that category? Because, as I said in the beginning, they're making the distinction.
So there's
not
different
only Israel,
state
it's
laws,
the West Bank.
Okay? There are state laws that restrict the ability of state pension funds to invest in companies that boycott Israel. I don't think they are directly applicable here, but what is applicable are the state anti-discrimination laws. Like I said, if you have a problem with the policy of a government, you cannot go as a U.S. company and discriminate against a person because of their race, their national origin, their religion, or their ethnicity.
It's about the location. It's not part of Israel.
So they have a location, as Ami said, and they are distinguishing in the West Bank between Israeli settlements where Jews live and settlements that they don't consider illegal, which is where Muslims live or Christians live, Palestinian Arabs live.
About something that was written in Haaretz, Israel's broadsheet today, their editorial, about something that tourism minister Yariv Levin, who we saw in Eli Hochenberg's article there, he threatens to hurt the company's activities in Israel. And here's what the Haaretz editorial said about that. He said, the tourism minister is prepared to forego Airbnb's activities in Israel if only the world stops distinguishing between legitimate Israel and illegitimate Israel. He wants to worsen tourism conditions in Israel in order to equate them to those in the occupied territories.
I'm not worried
isn't that throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
There are some people that are ready to give away Israel for the settlements and to say that all the thing called Israel is actually the settlements. And if you are not supporting the settlements, you are against Israel. And this is false because you can be supportive of Israel, like the EU, for example, and to give a lot of money and assistance and even security means to Israel, and still to be against the settlements and to think and to say that the settlements are illegal. It can go together.
It's actually settlement, but a corporation cannot discriminate against someone based on national origin and religion. First of all. Second of all, I'm not worried. I let you talk. Please don't interrupt, okay?
Yeah,
I'm not worried about the ability of Israelis to rent out their apartments. First of all, there are alternatives to Airbnb, and if anything this country is good at is inventing new technology to challenge it. Perhaps it's going to create a new market for a new type of platform that doesn't discriminate based on protected categories. But I want to make this point very clear. We are falling into a trap, okay? If a company, any other company, went and discriminated against persons who use their platform based on religion or where they live, we would all say that is illegal.
Should a boycott be answered with a boycott? Because that's, I think, what Yariv Levin is hinting to, and some other voices here in Israeli politics say, don't use Airbnb anymore. Minister of Public Security, Gilad Erdan, use Booking.com. Would you support, do you think is that what should happen?
I think consumers have every right to choose who they want to use or what companies they want to use. Absolutely.
According to your message, Israel should give tomorrow morning Israeli citizenship to the Palestinians living in the West Bank, because if you are not allowed to discriminate, how come the Palestinians living in the West Bank are not Israeli citizens? So you cannot hold the stick from both sides.
Guess
if
what?
you would like to have equality, do you want one state? I'm a Zionist. So you are not a Zionist, because I'm a Zionist, and I would like to see a Jewish democratic state.
New segment about Airbnb and not call me not a Zionist? Are you insane?
You're not a Zionist. If you don't care for the Jewish majority in Israel, you are post-Zionist.
Okay, guys, I just want to wrap it up. Get your feed before we finish up. I mean, just how important is this at all when there are just a couple hundred rooms that we're talking about? I mean, is this a big victory for BDS? Or are we?
The more we amplify it on news television, the more of a victory they get.
It's interesting. It's a symbolic act, but I think that it's very important to understand that the tourism in the West Bank is very weak and very small, and it doesn't have a real effect on what we call the state of Israel or the economic of Israel.
You were hinting that it could lead maybe to more. Is this a harbinger of we're going to see more of this? Is that what I'm asking?
We can see more of that, but eventually, when you cross over the green line, Israel is not there. Most of the Airbnb are inside Israel. All the big hotels are in Israel.
I just went to Psagot Winery yesterday, and the only thing that really, really hurts me is, as a Jew in the Western world, I can move anywhere freely except for Judea and Samaria. As a Jew, I can't move freely in Judea and Samaria. That is disgusting.
That is all the time. That's all the time
in
we
the
have.
Western world.
Brooke, Goldstein, Yariv, Oppenheimer.